So a quick introduction from myself as to what the Active Building Centre is. Some of you may or may not be familiar with the Transforming Construction Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund set up by the UK government to look into how we can develop energy positive buildings and deploy them across the market sectors that we all live, occupy and breathe within. There's a small video for me to play, and hopefully this will work and it will give you a better introduction for energy positive buildings and what ABC is than I potentially will. So do bear with me while I try and get this video working. So hopefully that gives you a slight introduction as to what active buildings are and how they form part of an agenda where we're trying to make the urban environment we live within more sustainable in the longer term. At the moment we potentially have buildings which are nodes on the network that are consumers of energy rather than production devices on the end of the energy network. So our mission statement as Active Building Centre is to create an independent national centre to convene industry, academia and government, because actually what we want to do is support people like yourselves to deploy active buildings, adopt technologies and deploy them with our support as a central convening point. And where did this start? Well, our vision has always been trying to transform and bridge between the construction sector and the energy sector by deploying active buildings. What do we mean by that? Well, we're trying to get buildings that are powered by the sun rather than other burning fuels. And we need to contribute to vehicle electrification, and we also need to start developing methods by which we can help decarbonise the built environment rather than be an energy drain on the built environment. And actually when you delve into what those inspirations are, well, I think we've had the glut of coal and gas for quite a significant time. And we may have people that say it's coal, but I don't fully believe that we've still reached the point where we've got truly clean coal. I don't think we ever will. So we've got to try things in a slightly different way. And when you start looking at the inspiration on a infrastructure level, and my colleagues here will explain this a bit better than I will, but this is essentially the problem we are facing. So the blue line is our gas consumption as a country. Over multiple years, but you can see that spikes in coincidence with your heating demand in a building. Incidentally, the red line at the bottom is actually your electrical load, and what you'll see there is a fluctuation between the daily cycles and the diurnal use cases of electricity. And if we propagate to a position where we have to electrify transport and we have to electrify heat, what we are trying to do as a nation is get the blue line into the red line. And what that essentially means is we have to specify a infrastructure that's highly redundant within its own capacity. And that's a local incentive for us and inspiration for us in this country. One of my colleagues was recently in India, and the problem there is probably a bit more acute because the air quality measures in places like Delhi and Mumbai, for instance, are 5 times higher than you would get the emissions from a conventional blast furnace in a steelworks. So you can stick your head into the flue gas of a steelworks and still have better air quality than you do in certain parts of the world. And that has obviously a health impact, a quality of life impact that we need to start addressing. Moving a bit further back, we have a wonderful nuclear reactor that shines down upon us and gives us 27 years worth of energy every day that we can use. And actually, a brilliant quote from 1931, put your money not in coal or oil. And I think we're at a point where essentially we've reached peak oil and gas, and we need to transition, and we need to transition more aggressively, and buildings are a functional part of that transition. This was a really interesting thing that happened in our balmy February that we've had this year. So this is a picture, I believe, on the 19th of February this year. Last year, this was the same picture, courtesy of the BBC. So I'm not saying this is climate change in action. I think that would be too brave in front of an audience. But we certainly are seeing changes, and we need to respond to those as humanity. We're not quite doing that yet. So that's the inspiration we've got, and the Active Building Centre itself is trying to create a nucleated access point for partners to come in and help us address the challenges we've got. And broadly speaking, we can segment that into 5 different strands. So number 1 is, as a demonstrator pipeline, the Active Building Centre is responsible for delivering a range of demonstrator buildings that showcase technology, showcase how we can adopt these new technologies and integrate them into our energy infrastructure. We obviously need to have connectivity between these buildings, because just a demonstrator building on its own is probably not going to change the world. We need thousands of buildings at this scale, and that takes a critical mass, and it takes effort, and it needs a community to deliver those with us. And then we have the opportunity at stage 3 to start thinking about how do we bring these communities together, or these buildings together, to start acting as one entity that interacts with the energy infrastructure, so that we can support the energy networks, rather than just be a drain on the end of the conductor. And obviously aggregating at stage 4 at national scale, if you have 1,000 batteries that are controlled at a single point, it means technically you can make the grid go kaboom. That's not what we want to do, but what we do want to do is understand the mechanisms by which we can interact and support the infrastructure that we have in a more confined and structured manner. And something that I'm personally quite committed to attempting to solve is, how do we get all of the learning from stages 1 to 4 and transpose that into the retrofit market. I'm a firm believer that we need to solve the technical problems first, and then expose those to greater market sectors, rather than trying to do random demonstrators of refurbishment in isolated mechanisms and different methodologies. So this is about creating some structure into the technologies we deploy, and where we deploy them, and how we deploy them. Next slide shows some of our partners. Some of them we've got here. It is a combination, as I mentioned earlier, of industry, academia and government. So we have a number of commercial and industrial partners that we've built relationships with and we are working with. Some of them very large organisations and multinationals. Some of them very small SMEs, very agile and very able to solve problems in a clock speed that's faster than the bigger guys. So how do we create an ecosystem where everybody lives in harmony and creates solutions that are supportive of one another? All of that work is underpinned by a university partnership and network of 10 universities that come together to underpin our research, bring together those solution spaces and articulate them in a way where people can adopt them. So proving the evidence base, providing capability for people to take data and understand what that data means and how they can use that data to reinforce their own business models is something that's very critical for us to move forward with. And how are we actually doing this? So that's the backdrop. The Active Classroom is a perfect example of this. So this is one of our initial demonstrators in Swansea University on the campus. A modular building, very lightweight in its construction methodology, screw pile system, very fast to actually construct. So the framing system goes together quite quickly. It is a panelized system. And what you'll see at the moment, this is a time lapse, I'll see you through the construction process. And in a moment, you'll see the roof plate being substituted with photovoltaics, and that's almost a finished building. So if you consider that's a month build or weekly build program rather than a year program, that's how we need to accelerate adoption of these buildings. They need to adopt modern methods of construction, they need to be able to be replicatable, and they need to be consistent in the way they perform. So that's an example of one we've already done, and that's created 132,000 miles that we can travel on a Nissan Leaf. So I haven't done a road trip yet, but get in the car, I might not come back. And then equally, between the break time of your favourite soap opera, we all have a cup of coffee. So it's the fundamentals of transport and being able to live in these buildings, and they occupy and work in a similar manner. The last video I want to show you is the second building that we did. So this is with an organisation called Wernick. They potentially can deploy active buildings on a scale and manufacture them at a scale which we've not really adopted in the past. So this is a new relationship, but a flagship building that we've built, again on campus, feeding electricity into the campus electricity network. And again, a time lapse of this building. So construction method slightly different. So this is a volumetric system. It's a timber-based volumetric system. Foundations being a concrete pad foundation system rather than screw piles. So embracing as many different technologies as we can. A curved arch roof system to track the sun and get more of the sunlight throughout the daily shade paths. And again, delivered at a pace that is unheard of. So I believe that build process went from design, construction and building in 9 or so months. And we currently occupy that space as the active building centre. We feed that electricity into the buildings, into vehicles that are on site, as well as back into the rest of the campus. The last slide I want to show you is obviously we're not just about education buildings, we're not just about little small classrooms, we are talking about homes, because that's where we also need to focus. So those homes are being adopted as active buildings. So this contains a 16 site development that's currently in plan and being built, and these are delivered by registered social landlords. So looking at affordability of housing, how do you integrate electricity generation systems into them, how do you control the storage of those that energy, and how do you actually release that energy in a manner that's going to reduce your bills over time. So that's a quick introduction to Active Building Centre.